In order for this tool to work on the car, the main thing we have to do is get the CV shaft out of the bearing. Press-in bearings are basically all the same. Front or the rear, any vehicle, sealed or unsealed. This is a hub unit bearing. This has the seal, the hub, the bearings, everything all in one, basically just bolted in the vehicle with 4 bolts. So that actually works quite well, but the advantage of press-in wheel bearing is usually these will last longer. There's 2 different styles of press-in wheel bearing. There's a sealed style and there's a unsealed style. This is a unsealed press-in wheel bearing. You can see all the bearings individually because the seal is missing, and it's that way on both sides. It'll require a small 2-step process, which is add your seals. These seals ride on the CV shaft, keep debris out and keep your grease in. Sometimes there'll be a reluctor ring right behind this seal on the inside, but you won't know which side it's on because they can look identical. If you can see and feel a little screwdriver magnetism right here, you want to make sure you face this side of the bearing when you press it in towards the wheel speed sensor if you have one. Seals separate or included in the bearing. Either way, they're both the same process. ATD 8625 bearing press tool. Sometimes they're referred to as front wheel drive press tool kits, and Amazon is the best place to get it. I'll leave some links down below. 5-pound and 10-pound versions. I like the 10-pound version. This will attach to your hub, and this will separate to pull the hub out of this bearing, and it's one of the first steps. Any questions on how this process works, if it'll work on your car, any questions at all, let me know. I will get back to you. Hit that like button. I would love to hear what kind of car, what year it is that you're working on. The front wheel bearing on the right side is bad. 2002 Subaru WRX Impreza. So you got your bracket, you got your rotor, the bracket's mounted to the knuckle, the bearing's mounted to the knuckle. If you have any play like that, the wheel bearing's bad because it's allowing that rotor to move around. One of them's moving, so it's always the wheel bearing. If you have a bad wheel bearing, it's going to shake in all directions, right? So we're going to shake it from top to bottom. Do not recommend the use of spacers. I've seen these get loose and wheels fall off cars. Just going to take a screwdriver, put it between the rotor and a pad, or a rotor and a caliper, and just slowly pry. And that will give us the room we need to slide this caliper off. S-hook or a small bungee cord, kind of like this, hang it up out of the way through the caliper somewhere convenient. It seems as loose right here. I can't get much leverage on it. The axle's right here, so we need to come up with a way to remove that while not disturbing these 2 upper strut bolts. These 2 upper strut bolts control the camber adjustment. This isn't going to change the alignment by popping this ball joint loose. I'll pry this arm down, slide the CV shaft out. This is a 17 down here. Here's where the trick comes in. We're just going to strike right here on the lower control arm mount point. That is going to release this stud from the ball joint. I could hit it right here, I could hit it right here on the back side. Since I'm right-handed, I'm going to aim for this general area. Alright, now I think I loosened it just because there was more of a thud at the end. Pry bar and pry down. If you're not comfortable striking the lower control arm to jar the ball joint loose, 5-in-1 front end service kit, ball joint separator, pitman arm puller, tie rod end tool. You got a bunch of things here that you could use on the front end of your vehicle. See how the shaft has a taper to it, centers itself inside the lower control arm. Great for alignment purposes. It does make it a little more difficult to get out of the lower control arm. This hole and shaft for the tie rod end is also tapered. So these are all similar concepts. If you want to take this tie rod end out, you just strike it right here and that'll just jar it loose and usually fall out the way that it's oriented right here. The weight of it will pull it right down. Now that the bottom is loose, that will provide enough space to slide out our CV shaft. Buddy that was driving this car, he could hear that because he knows the car pretty well, but I couldn't hear it because the exhaust is so loud that this is bad. I can tell you why that bearing failed. There's no inner seal. There should be a seal in this bore right here. Whoever replace that last, forgot the seal. No big deal, we'll put a new seal in it and we'll get them back up and running. Be careful with your fingers right here. I have had this pry bar slip. Use a pair of channel locks. So we're just gonna pry down, put that in there, we'll give this a little shake. To access the bearing, we gotta pull this hub apart. So we're gonna depress it by using a slide hammer. This is the best way. You could use a hammer and a socket to do it from the inside, pound it out. You risk damaging the hub. There should be a seal right here. See some rust, we got some water in there. The ring landing for the seal on this side, and then it's the landing for the bearing on the inside. Significant damage. They're trying to force it. That's okay. That ring landing should be just fine. It's a pretty substantial piece of metal all the way around. So just give that kind of a nice little wipe down. Whatever you do, don't stick your fingers in here and just start walking them around too hard. I've definitely gotten slivers of metal from bad bearings in my finger, so you don't want to go too bonkers. That's a circlip right there. So we need to get this out, and we got to do that from the inside. I messed up a lot of things and learned the hard way to get where I'm at, which is why you guys on YouTube are smart, because you're checking this all out and you're making sure you don't make these same mistakes, and you're learning the easy way. You hear all these horror stories of people messing up their car and this and that and the other thing. Bad experiences, all the things that can happen. This is a bad experience. I have to do a whole lot of extra work. Seal's missing. This is pretty obvious. Now to get this snap ring out, you can see there's these little ledges right here where you can get a screwdriver in there and pop that out. This secures the bearing from popping out. This is the extra safety measure. The integrity of this is still good, so we can reuse it. These snap rings can be on the inside of the knuckle or the outside of the knuckle. This landing area, the ring that it goes in, I'm gonna inspect that. If there's anything on here that's not good, we'll just go ahead and replace this knuckle. If it's necessary, we do it. If it's not, we don't. Now what I need to do is find a cup that fits right back here, or a spacer that the bearing will fit right into and drop right through. Presses just perfectly. Inner landing of the knuckle where the seal goes. We'll put this spacer here in order to push on it. But we need a way to push on this race. So there's two ways to do it. You can use a bearing spacer that's big enough to just catch the lip of the race. It needs to pass through this area here where the seal is going to land, and that does, and that hits the race that's tapered, and it'll push it right through. It might rock a little bit, but it'll push it right through. Now you might get some marks on the edge of your race here. You can see where I've probably pressed out bearings like that before. The other option, which I will always use if I can on an old bearing only, would be to just use the old bearing inner race and cage and rollers to push that out. You never ever want to push a new bearing in, because all the pressure of pushing on these roller bearings will destroy these brand new bearings that you're trying to replace. That's one of the things you definitely don't want to screw up. We need a spacer that fits the bearing. We could use this spacer. We could flip it around. It's not quite the right size. We could use this size that we previously kind of used. Let's go that direction. This is the size that I like for no particular reason. Go ahead and assemble your bolt. And now basically this takes place of a press. We're going to press the bearing into that cup. You can do this by hand with a ratchet. Alright, that made quick work of it. These Milwaukee tools are amazing. We have a cup with a bearing in it. Here's our washer and our spacer. And there's our old bearing. The inside seems to be pretty flat, so the bearing can rest up against it. There's a collar in there, a little plastic collar, and that's just basically holding the two halves of the bearing in. Press this collar out, and now you have two bearing inner cage assemblies and the center section here. Make sure we have this inner bearing in, because once we push this race in, we may not be able to get that bearing in on that side. This side, which we can put in after we press this outer race and bearing in. You find a perfect spacer that fits right up on that bearing, but will also pass through and into our bore. So you can see that this fits in there just barely, but yet it fits our bearing cup exactly like we need it to. So it's going to fit right on our cup just like that, and push our cup in. And since this one presses from the inside, we're just going to kind of get it up and in the bore hole. And since we're only going to be going right up to this lip in here, basically all we need is a spacer that will land on the outside right here of the knuckle. And I think that one will do the trick. Yep. Our spacer slipped off to the side just a little bit. I got everything all lined up. Tighten this up. Now when it hits the landing on the inside, it should have an abrupt stop. The socket will stop spinning, and there'll even be some different noise to the way it's being pulled in. So you want to make sure you don't over tighten things. When it stops, it stops. Now at this stage of the game, I'm just forcing it if I keep going. It definitely landed. So now we'll just remove our tool. Don't ever lubricate the surfaces that we're pressing together. That would kind of defeat the purpose of pressing them together. It may not hurt anything, but on the same token, it's not designed to be done that way. Here's our race on the outside. I can remove it, so after it's all said and done, we didn't have to have that installed. Check our ring landing right there, which is good, and everything's seated. So now we need to push our clip in. You can also use some snap ring pliers. Once you get it started in there, make sure you hold on to it at all times, because I've seen those things go flying. Wear your safety glasses, because those things can get you. So just pry on this a little bit, make sure, yep, it's seated in there all the way. Install our bearing. There's our inner bearing. Now we need to put our seal right there. Here's our inner seal, and that is going to just kind of go into that little spot right there. So what you want to do is just you gotta get that in there square, and it's going to land on the clip. So even if you start it a little bit wonky, as long as you don't bend it, it should go in pretty straight. Just work it around. Hit this. There we go. I think we're getting her in. Now I look really bad at this because I'm catering to the camera here, trying to give you guys the best angle. That's real slick. So I dropped it on the ground. I'm going to clean the dirt off that, put a little more grease on it. Using a seal or race driver would be the proper way to do this. Typical hub seals, inners and outers like we're driving today, I can just tap them in with a hammer and I feel comfortable. This would have knocked in our seal quite nicely. It's tapered for a race. If you need to install bearing races like in a rear axle type situation. Also, one of the reasons I don't have a lot of cases in here is because I have more room. I don't want to have 10 toolboxes, so this is a much easier way for me. After talking all that smack about the last installer, I'm gonna end up damaging something, but if I do, I'll put another seal on. Using the old finger gauge here, and that is installed all the way, perfectly flat. I really like it, so I'm pretty happy there, as long as I didn't hit that with my hammer. It was at a really awkward angle there. A little bit of wheel bearing grease in here. Wheel bearings, U-joints, ball joints. As far as grease goes, the more the merrier. I didn't disturb the grease inside this cage. This is still packed. Just cleaned off the outside. There's a couple specks of dirt there. So we're just gonna shove that in there. We might get a little squish action, and that's fine. Now we don't have to put a clip on this side because there's this ring landing right here all the way around. As long as we can pound this evenly all the way around, we should be able to seal this bearing. Just by putting that seal in, it shows you the imperfections. I gotta take 2 or 3 extra looks just because of the way the last person did this. I don't want to miss anything. It looks like this is gonna work perfectly fine. They're at home. They spin good. Now they're kind of loosey-goosey because these are now going to be pressed onto the hub unit. We need to get this old inner race removed. Ridge where it's not smooth anymore. Burnelling, spalling, divots or ditches in the race make the bearing no longer tight. Allow the bearings to wobble a little bit, which gives you your play. We just want to slide this collar off. This inner race is pressed onto this hub. Even though I have a press sitting right over there, this is how I do it every time. So you take a chisel and you try to hammer and press this race off. You don't want to hit this inner hub. Take this grinder and I'll grind this entire race at a slight angle right here so that I can get in as deep as I can, 1/2 or 3/4 of the way through this thickness if you can. Go down just deep enough. That will give me a slot to stick my chisel in. This whole collar will split like this and you can pull it off by hand. If you nick it really bad, then you're just going to want to go ahead and replace this. Option number 3 is always the best option, much more gooder. Bearing separator puller kit. It has a range of pullers. The fourth option is you can always take your bearing press splitter, set this on the press, take your press anvil and you'd push that down and this would be remaining on top. And then on bottom will be the hub. That's a good sign. It's walking out. I'm only pushing the button on here like 1/4 throttle. I'm doing it nice and slow so that that bit stays in here. You just go full throttle right out of the gate. It'll chip off this race. And we may chip this off right now. The way that it started moving immediately, more likely than not, we're just gonna shove this off in one pretty easy motion. Our splines are good, our surface here is good, no reason that you can't reuse this. I almost forgot, this is the seal surface. Can't get it cleaned up, I'll have to get a new hub. I'm gonna give it a few scuffs of 80, and then after that I'll go to 120, 180, and then after that I'll go to 400. You can see it's got some pits, but you can't get your finger in them. If we were trying to hold in engine oil on a crank seal or something, I'd be a little more nervous. Grease is going to have a harder time crossing through there. This is for the outer seal. That is what the seal surface should have looked like. This is going to be the inner seal. You can't get your fingernail in there at all. That's a perfect seal surface. I'm going to put a little bit of wheel bearing grease in that little crevasse right there. And that'll just, you know, give it some more grease, plus it'll give that seal a fighting chance to survive. There's a little cavity right there and you can fill that right up. There's never been a dry bearing in the world that's outlasted a greased bearing. When it comes to grease, liberal amounts are always good. I'm gonna try to clean the bearing surfaces of grease. When we are installing the hub only, you gotta turn this flat. By turning that flat, you'll allow this hub to come all the way in and push flat against this race. And a lot of times it won't even get fully flat. It'll just stop, you know, like 1/8 of an inch before that. You do want to press together on that inner bearing race. That's actually not going to put any forces on these rollers. It's just going to give something to push against so that this hub can press itself into this bearing race. There's no other way to do it, but you got to have this flat. You don't want to have this conical cone here kind of sticking down in there, because then it won't press all the way in and you'll have a loose wheel bearing. So use your flat end. Now this is the smallest spacer in the kit. The beauty of this is it also fits between the seal on the back side. So we're gonna put this in our seal, and you can see me pushing already. So now we're gonna push against that spacer, and we're gonna push against the face of this hub. Feed our bolt through our hub, and that's dry. Pick any spacer that will go around the edge here. It doesn't matter which one it is, as long as it fits. This is nice and flat, so we'll put that on there. Put our washer on. Put our nut on. See how that spacer fits right into that seal back there? It doesn't affect that seal or push on that seal or ruin that seal in any way. Tighten this all up. You can see it's not true right now. As soon as we tighten it up, it'll pull itself true into the bearing. We got our sockets on. Everything looks good. See how it stopped right there? All of a sudden, that's, if I pull the trigger anymore at this stage of the game, I'm just kind of forcing things. So you don't want to do that. See where that bearing basically didn't get pressed all the way into that inner race. If you were to switch that spacer around the wrong direction, it definitely wouldn't be pressed in correctly. A perfect wheel bearing. Well, perfect till somebody tears us apart and sees what we had to deal with, but it should last a long, long time. Now, if you have a sealed bearing, you're not gonna have to deal with any of that seal stuff, but the concepts of removing it and pushing it back in is exactly the same. The CV axle nut is the fail-safe, along with the CV shaft, that holds the bearing and the hub all together. These act as a long bolt through the two of them and hold them together. So you want to make sure you torque this to the proper amount. To restake your nut, pound it back down flush with this keyway. You can make it pretty, that's fantastic, but as long as you get it pushed in. The main thing holding the nut in place is the torque of the fastener, so this should never come into play, but if it were, this will slow it down right here from spinning off. The moment of truth. Is the bearing tight or is the bearing loose? There's no play whatsoever. I also have videos on press-in style bearings, bolt-in style bearings, trailer bearings, and if you want to check them out, that'd be cool. And if you're new, please subscribe, and see you in the next one.